everyone. Ready for a deep dive that might just change how you deal with, well, pretty much everything?
I'm excited for this one.
We're tackling Mel Robbins' new book, The Let Them Theory. And let me tell you, it's packed with stuff that can really make a difference in your life.
Absolutely. This isn't just some vague self-help stuff.
Right. We're talking about practical advice, backed by research and real-life examples, all about feeling calmer and more in control, even when, life throws those curveballs.
And we'll be breaking down all the key insights, those juicy bits that you can actually use.
Exactly. And get this, the core idea is about letting go of things you can't control and focusing on what you can.
Sounds simple, right?
It is, in theory. But putting it into practice, that's where the magic happens. And Robbins gives you the tools to do just that.
Plus, there's a twist. It's not just about letting them. There's this whole other side to it, the let me part. And that's where things get really interesting.
You'll have to keep listening to find out what that's all about. But first, let's give everyone a little taste of what sparked this whole theory.
Robbins kicks things off with a super relatable scene. Her son's prom night. Think last-minute chaos, typical teenage stuff. You know the drill.
Oh, I can only imagine.
But instead of getting swept up in the frenzy of trying to fix everything, Robbins has this epiphany.
And it all comes down to a melting ice cube.
Exactly. She realizes that time with loved ones, it's precious, fleeting, just like that ice cube. You can't stop it from melting, but you can savor each moment.
Okay, that's a pretty powerful image.
It is, and it perfectly captures the essence of letting them go and finding a sense of peace in the process. It's actually kind of like the mindset behind her famous 5-second rule, you know?
Oh yeah, that countdown technique to push past hesitation and just take action.
Exactly. It's like she's been hinting at this let them concept for a while now.
Totally. But this book takes it to a whole new level, delving into the science behind why we crave control in the first place.
Right, because it's not just that we're all control freaks, there's an actual biological reason.
Tell me about it. So it turns out our brains are wired to seek control because way back when it was crucial for survival. But in today's world, that need for control often backfires, leading to stress and anxiety.
Makes total sense. So letting them go becomes about recognizing when we're trying to control things that are actually outside our control.
Like you can't make someone change their mind no matter how much you want them to, right?
Right, precisely. Robbins actually brings in Dr. Aditi Nerurkar, a Harvard-trained physician, to explain how our brains and bodies go into this survival mode when we feel threatened, leading to that all-too-familiar stress response.
Okay, but how do we actually hit the brakes on that runaway train of stress?
That's where the let me part comes in. We'll get into the details later, but it's about taking charge of our own reactions to stressful situations.
So instead of getting all worked up when things don't go our way, we shift our focus to what we can control, like our breathing, our thoughts, our actions.
Exactly. And Robbins gives this great example of being on a plane with someone who just wouldn't stop coughing.
Ugh, I've been there. It's the worst. You're trapped and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. So instead of getting increasingly annoyed, Robbins focuses on what she can control. She puts on her noise-canceling headphones and practices deep breathing techniques.
Ah, so she's letting them cough and
Ah.
creating a calmer experience for herself.
Exactly. And Dr. Nerurkar explains the science behind this, how deep breathing activates the vagus nerve, which helps calm the nervous system. It's like a built-in reset button.
So it's not about being passive. It's about taking back control in a different way.
But what about those situations where letting go feels impossible, like dealing with other people's judgments?
Robbins dives into that too, and she gets super personal, sharing her own struggles with fearing judgment, especially early in her career.
I think a lot of people can relate to that fear of judgment, especially online. Absolutely. And this fear often leads us to censor ourselves, dimming our own light. But Robbins offers this incredibly empowering concept. She calls it giving people the freedom to judge.
Okay, that sounds kind of radical, but I'm intrigued.
It's a mental shift that lets you detach from the need for everyone's approval, like saying, you do you and I'll do me.
I can already see how freeing that could be. But how does that play out in real life? Does it actually work?
Well, Robbins gives this powerful example from her own life, involving her mother's disapproval of her husband, Chris.
Oh, family dynamics, always a fun one.
It shows how understanding someone's perspective, even if you don't agree with it, can create more space for acceptance and compassion.
Okay, this is getting really good. I can't wait to hear more about how this let them theory applies to different areas of life, like friendships, relationships, and dealing with those people who, let's face it, just seem impossible to please.
We'll be unpacking all of that and more in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about that whole freedom to judge idea from Mel Robbins' let them theory.
Right, and honestly, I'm still wrapping my head around it. It almost sounds like, I don't know, are we just letting people walk all over us?
Not at all. It's more about realizing you can't control other people's thoughts, their opinions, no matter how hard you try.
Okay, I see that. But how does that actually help us? Does ignoring judgment just make it magically disappear?
It's not about ignoring it. Think of it as like changing your perspective.
Oh, okay, I'm listening.
Instead of immediately getting all defensive and taking it personally, maybe, just maybe, it's just information.
Information. Like, what do you mean?
Well, it might tell you something about that other person, their values, their experiences, even their biases. Doesn't necessarily have anything to do with you.
So someone might judge us harshly, not because we did something wrong, but because of their own, I don't know, baggage.
Exactly. Robbins uses this term frame of reference to explain it. It's like everyone sees the world through their own lens, right? Shaped by everything they've been through, their beliefs, all that.
Okay, so instead of getting all riled up or feeling attacked, we can try to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly. Now, it doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it might help you detach a bit from that emotional sting.
This is starting to make a lot more sense. It's like taking back your power by choosing how you react.
Precisely. And she illustrates this with a story about her own mom. Her mom initially didn't approve of her husband, Chris.
Oh, family stuff. Always a bit complicated.
Right. But this story highlights how if you try to see things from their frame of reference, you can actually build more compassion, maybe even strengthen relationships.
So that's for big, heavy judgments. What about everyday annoyances? Let's say a coworker is constantly negative and it's dragging you down. What then? Just sit there and take it.
That's a great question, and Robbins addresses this head on. Remember that let me part.
Right, taking control of our reactions.
Exactly. She'd say, you can't stop your coworker from being negative, but you can choose how you respond. Set boundaries, maybe limit your exposure to them, or try to steer the conversation in a more positive direction.
Got it. It's not about being a doormat. It's about seeing what you can control.
Precisely. And sometimes letting them be negative means getting yourself out of that situation entirely.
Ah, interesting. Giving yourself permission to protect your own well-being.
Exactly. You have a responsibility to yourself to create a positive space. Sometimes that means letting them go their own way, even if it's family or a friend.
This reminds me of all the times I've tried to force a friendship that just, I don't know, wasn't working anymore. Maybe we grew apart or our values changed, but I kept trying out of guilt or something.
How did that feel?
Exhausting, honestly. I was pouring energy into something that wasn't giving me anything back.
And that's exactly what Robbins warns against. A big part of the book is about navigating adult friendships. It's packed with insight.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
She starts by saying, adult friendships, they're just different from those childhood ones.
Right. When you're young, it's all about proximity. You see your friend at school every day, live in the same neighborhood, easy to hang out.
Exactly. But as we get older, proximity, it's not the main thing anymore. We move, switch jobs, life takes different paths.
And your priorities shift too, right? Some folks settle down, have kids, others focus on their careers. Everyone's at a different pace.
Exactly. And this is where Robbins talks about these three pillars of friendship. Proximity, timing, and energy, that's what we need to pay attention to as adults.
Okay, let's break that down. Proximity, we've touched on that. What about timing?
Timing is all about being in sync, similar life stages, priorities. When we're young, we're kind of going through similar things at the same time. But as adults, well, it can unfold very differently.
So one friend might be climbing the career ladder while another's starting a family. Tough to relate if you're not in the same place, right?
Precisely. And this can cause friendships to naturally drift apart. Not anyone's fault, just a part of life.
This reminds me of a friend from college. We were super close, but then, she moved, got married, had kids, and I was still single, building my career. It's like we just didn't have that much in common anymore. We both knew it was time.
And that's a perfect example of how timing can impact friendships. Doesn't mean anyone was a bad friend, just different seasons of life.
That's a really good way to put it. Okay, proximity, timing. What about that third one? Energy.
Energy is the vibe you bring to the friendship, Are you supportive, positive, encouraging? And it has to go both ways. Robbins emphasizes that.
So if a friendship feels one-sided, draining, that's a sign the energy's off.
Exactly. And Robbins gets really honest here. She shares a story about feeling excluded from a friend group as her life changed. It shows how even our own negativity can sometimes create distance.
Interesting. So it's not always the other person. Sometimes we're the ones bringing down the vibe.
Exactly. That's where self-awareness is so important. Recognize your own patterns, how they might be affecting your relationships.
If you're always complaining, bringing drama, that's going to have an impact, right?
Precisely.